All businesses run on systems, and the truth is most founders don't really understand them. They've worked with a consultant in the past or heard that they need to care about systems, but they don't understand what they're looking at. And the reality is most consultants way overcomplicate what a system really is. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what a system is, how to implement them into your business so it can scale and potentially even run without you. Now let's jump right in to talk about what a system actually is. All it is a workflow or process that is repeatable and gives a similar output every single time. Now, the more refined it gets, the better the output consistency becomes. And that's a big piece of the system. So there are a few steps in a system. The first piece of it is we have kind of, imagine some sort of flow, and we have a request. So we're focusing kind of on what an agency or business would actually see. So in this request, that's your input, is a customer is asking to get something back. So they're placing an order maybe for a landing page, maybe for a graphic design, maybe for a video edit. That's the input. They need something. Now, your team needs to process that, and that's the work that's actually being done. So you have your request coming in, and then your team should have some sort of system in place to fulfill that work request. From there, once the work is done, you get the final product, which is the deliverable or the result. So if you think about this straight line, someone orders something from you, your team produces the order, and then you give the client the final result. That in itself is a system. Now, there is something that's missing from most systems, and it's a really key thing that I want to cover soon. So hang in there, and I'm going to go into a lot more depth about what the system actually is and how your business can really utilize this simple mentality and improve your business. So before we actually get into the depth of systems, we need to understand that most businesses don't fall apart because of lack of effort. They get stuck somewhere and they aren't able to continue work, and they're not able to move forward because there's what's called a bottleneck or constraint in their business. So if you think about this, your team could be working very, very hard at a process. And I can give you an example of a business development representative in kind of an agency model. So let's just say you have a BDR who is doing hundreds of calls a day. They are way outperforming on volume, but they're getting stuck on the results. They're not really moving forward. They're not converting their calls into closes, and there's something broken in their system. It could be their script, it could be their tone, it could be the time they're calling, it could be the numbers they're calling. There are many variables in that work piece that could potentially be done incorrectly. So even though they're way outperforming in one metric, they're underperforming in something else that prevents them from moving forward and being successful with the business. Now that is why systems really matters. We have to look at these pieces and figure out how we can move the business forward and actually grow. So the biggest thing that a system does is it answers questions before they come up. So for example, how do we deliver this? Who do we email? What system are we using? What tools are we doing? What does good look like? A strong system builds in the answers to pretty much everyone's questions, whether it be client facing or your team doing the actual work. So that's a piece of your system. Now, this is where consultants make it very complicated. They tell you need to map out every workflow in your business. You need to build out standard operating procedures or SOPs. You need to build out hundreds of FAQs. And while yes, in the long term, that might be the correct solution, for most businesses, that's not achievable. It'll take too much time and it actually won't move the needle. So it's a bad system. I'm going to show you how to take systems and find the actual constraint in your business so you can implement it and see real growth. That way you get the return and the value of every piece that you're implementing. Now, we already mentioned that there's 4 pieces of a strong system. So we have the request. Again, that's the information coming in. We have the work that's being done. We have the product that's being delivered. And then what I left out and what I find so critical is the feedback loop. So as you have all of these things, if you just consistently do something, so for example, the BDR calling we mentioned, if he just continues to call and he calls and he calls and he calls, but he's not getting feedback on a result. So maybe he's not knowing how many people booked a call. Maybe he's just not listening to his past calls. He's not looking at what's being successful and trying to recreate that success. He's never improving that system. So he could 10x the amount of calls and still be worse than someone who does 1/10 the work because they're converting at a much higher rate. So this feedback loop is so critical in building any sort of system. Now in my business, one of the things we implemented was we took basically our sales team and we just automatically texted every lead after a sales call and asked them to fill out a really short questionnaire. And what it did is it allowed us to see a lot of gaps because even our top closers were doing things things very wrong. And we were able to make small little changes based on the feedback to improve our system to actually grow the business. Now that's, again, the key is we looked at a constraint and then we figured out how to fix it. And one of our constraints in that scenario was we didn't have large enough time gaps in between each call. So calls were running late and then they wouldn't show to their next call because they didn't want to be rude to the person that they were currently on the phone with, which kind of makes sense. But the thing is, we were losing a lot of leads because of that. And then if they did cut the call short, they weren't doing it properly. And then they were pissing off the person they were talking to and then rushing the next call. So it was a very broken process. And the only way we found that was through that feedback loop. And it wasn't necessarily the sales executive's fault either. They just didn't know how to solve that issue. And they didn't understand what the system didn't solve that issue for them. Some real world examples of those requests are going to be landing pages, outbound campaigns, email marketing, advertising, consulting, someone asking for help building systems in their business. By the way, I own Founder Systems AI. It's a course and community that helps business owners understand systems and implement them into their business. And I give a lot away for free. So if you want some of my documentation down below for free, go ahead and grab that. But let's get back into here. So then work is actually doing the work. So it's actually building those landing pages, actually designing the copy for emails. It's everything in between that you need to do to get that delivered. Then of course we have the delivery, which hopefully is pretty simple. It's what does that landing page look like? And then in that process, typically you might have a revision. So that could be another feedback loop, which is going into step 4 is, so we finished the work, but the client's not happy. So that's perfectly fine. So then we get that feedback. And one of the things we can track in a feedback loop is maybe, okay, so 1 revision is standard, but we have one employee that's getting 10 revisions. What are they doing wrong? And how do we help them improve and retrain and improve the system so that way they're actually getting better? Now, the reality is the feedback loop is one of the things that is most often failed at. When I come into a business, that's the first thing I look at because I can't solve any issues if I don't have feedback on the issues. So looking at CRMs for show rates, looking at different metrics, understanding how the ads are performing, understanding how my sales team is performing, conversion rates, anything we can look at to determine. One of the key things that helps me is if I have no feedback, I start with a time study. Now, the time study just gets it identifies where people are actually spending their time, and then I can ask them for feedback on is that where they should be spending their time. So I'm really analyzing what's going on in the business. But if you have proper metrics and proper feedback loops, you'll start to find these issues quicker and you can solve them and actually see a progression in the growth of the business. So again, going back to that sales rep, as we stopped having people no-show, we were able to take advantage of more of our leads, which cost us money to get, but then we also converted those leads. So it increased our conversion rates and increased the value of new sales, so the revenue, but also increased lifetime value because our customers, as they were coming in, had a better experience. So we found all of that from one simple feedback form. Now, one of the most key things in understanding systems is the difference between a constraint or bottleneck in your business and noise. Now, a constraint is something that's actually holding the business back. And a simple way to look at this is if I ask you the question, if we fix this, will it improve something in the business? Will it reduce risk? Will it increase lifetime value? Will it increase revenue? Or will it recapture or claim some time for something so it can be reused into the business? So if the answer is no to any of those, you don't have a constraint, you have noise. An example of noise in my business is sometimes, every month we have a couple hundred clients. And so if 1 or 2 clients come complaining, and they might have had a really bad experience and it might be justified, but the thing is the failure rate is less than 1% of my business. So yes, we want to solve that problem. We want to build a system that solves the problem. So a lot of times for my businesses, we have a lot of guarantees. And so we just refund them or we solve it by getting the work done correctly. And that helps reduce the noise. But if I tried to make a systematic improvement of something that was an only 1% change in the business, which is going to be different every single time because every customer is going to have something, there's always going to be changes on what people see and want and need. So that becomes noise, but it can become very, very loud, especially if there's 1 client a month or 2 clients a month that are upset about something. Yes, if it's a systematic, if every single month it's the exact same thing, then it might be a systematic change. But if every single month it's just a different thing, a call maybe got rescheduled, they didn't like a copy, they didn't like X, Y, and Z, small little nuances. That is more noise than a systematic change, because if you invest your time in improving the sales process we talked about earlier versus that one client, we might have solved one client for maybe that 1 in 1,000 had that issue. Whereas on the sales side, 1 in 10 were having that issue. So you can see how that constraint is much bigger in our business and actually is holding us back. So when we look at solving problems, we want to understand what the constraint is, what's holding us back. And then by solving this, will it actually move the needle? And another question I always ask is it worth the amount of money or time that needs to go in? So again, solving that 1 out of 100 issue might not be worth the money and time outside of just giving a refund or doing the work again. Whereas fixing the sales call side is 100% worth the time and really is just retraining and re-educating, which might be an hour or a full day to build out an operating process involved. So the rule that really changed everything for me is your business moves at the speed of your slowest step. And so what that means is we're looking for those constraints again, but think about it as if you have a top performer and a bottom performer, and I hate letting people go, but this is a key thing. If you take all your money and time and invest it in this bottom performer to try to move them up a little bit, that might cost you $100,000 and a whole bunch of time, whereas you could have doubled the output of your top performer by giving them some of those resources. So sometimes the easiest thing is to stop a process or remove something from the business. Now, same thing with the dials is that example of that business development representative. If they were doing 1,000 dials a day, which is very, very hard. I've run business development teams and typically they do 300 to 400 calls a day at the highest end. But if they were doing 1,000, the trick would be to look at it and say, hey, you're really hitting these dials, but your quality of these calls are very bad. So let's look at this. The constraint is not the number of calls. As a matter of fact, let's cut your calls in half and spend double the amount of time on the quality of the calls, and we think we'll see the results. Now, for every single business, this is different, but that's why that feedback loop is so important, is you have to catch things early before they become problems. And the real strategy here is to solve one constraint at a time. And that's another thing that I see consultants miss on, is that they try to map out your entire business and they start fixing different things, which does work, but not always, because you can't provide all the needed resources to just fix one problem and actually move the needle. Now, the next key piece is a rule of scaling. Is with marketing, it's really the engine to our business. So we have marketing who's driving leads into our business. Then we have sales that's closing our leads, and then fulfillment that's delivering. Now, typically we're spending money on leads. So if we have a delivery issue where we have a whole bunch of leads coming in, a whole bunch of purchases, but then we can't deliver, we shouldn't spend any more money on leads, because we have a capacity issue and we need to fix this capacity so we can fulfill for our team. Now, typically that's not what the issue is with a lot of companies, especially as they get more mature. A lot of times it's top of funnel, it's marketing, or it's sales. And what I find is very often for companies that have been around for a while, it's on their sales side where they have leads coming in, but they're just not calling back. They're not being speedy. They're not taking care of their leads properly, and things are falling through the cracks. And we see a lot of that with CRM data. So we just want to look at the one actual issue in our system that we can implement to make the business better. So systems really aren't hard, and they don't have to be overcomplicated. You do want, as you build these, to map out the actual flow and build a standard operating procedure, which I have templates down below as part of the Founder Systems AI course and community. They are so critical, but the piece is you only do it for the needy part of your business. And if you can't find the needy part of your business, figure out where you're spending the majority of your time and start solving there, which is just so easy with a time study, which you can also grab down below. But you do this time study of your time so you can recapture your own time so you can start solving other problems. So for example, I used to spend a lot of time doing billing and admin work when it came to money coming into my business, because I thought that was something that was so critical that it wasn't acceptable to make mistakes. Now, I eventually let that go and I built out a system, but that recaptured 20 hours a week of my time, which then I was able to leverage into other systems. So you just start working on identifying, solving, and then making sure you're answering the question, is this going to actually improve my business? Am I recapturing time? Am I reducing risk in the business? Am I increasing lifetime value, or am I increasing new revenue, new sales? So again, find one problem, fix it, then scale. If If you like content like this and you're struggling and you might feel like you're in your own way, the course Founder Systems AI is definitely for you. And I want to help you grow your business. So check it out down below. And again, we do have a whole bunch of freebies, including standard operating procedures and templates that allow you to implement. And my YouTube is dedicated to implementing systems in your business. So make sure to hit that subscribe. Thank you.